Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad to see you again as we dive into a brand new chapter in the emotional love story between the single mother Ly Hoai Ca and the righteous police officer Hung. This isn't just a story about romance, it's a journey of confronting the past, healing old wounds, and fighting for a happiness that once seemed out of reach. In the previous episodes, we witnessed touching moments between Hoai Ca and Hung. After all the misunderstandings and pain, they began to see something different in each other, a sense of empathy, a fragile glimmer of hope amidst a turbulent life. They started learning how to face their painful histories rather than run from them. And it was this very courage that opened a door for them to hold hands and move forward together. There's also one particular detail that stirred up many conflicting emotions, the return of the man who once plunged Hoai Ca's life into darkness. The very man who hurt her now reappears, seeking forgiveness, wanting to make amends, to take responsibility and become part of her and her child's life. A man who once embodied her deepest pain now tries to become a source of strength, a father figure Tony never had. But is this change genuine? And is Hoai Ca strong enough to forgive and offer him a second chance? Just when everything seemed to be settling, just when hearts were starting to heal, fate decided to test them once more, in the harshest way possible. A fierce storm struck suddenly, sweeping everything away. The small house where Hoai Ca and her child had been living was heavily damaged, partially collapsing in the pouring rain. In that fleeting moment, their lives hung in the balance, between life and death, between hope and despair. Now, everything depends on one thing: will Hung make it in time? Can he fight through the storm to save the woman he loves and the innocent child? A man who has already witnessed so much pain, will he be forced to face loss once again? Or will a miracle rise from the heart of the storm? Today's episode will bring us to the edge of our seats, filled with life and death decisions, and emotions that are quiet yet overwhelming. Let's watch together, and see if fate might finally show mercy to Hoai Ca, the woman who has endured so much, and to Hung, the man who has silently protected her through it all. The story continues, and I truly believe you won't be able to look away once it unfolds. Thank you for always being here. Now, let's step into the world of Hoai Ca and Hung, where love must now face its greatest trial yet. A storm like no other in years is approaching, carrying with it a terrifying force of destruction. Urgent weather reports flood the airwaves, issuing warnings about potential landslides, collapsing homes, especially in riverside areas where the water is rising rapidly, now beyond control. Sirens blare across radio frequencies, urging people to evacuate immediately. Everyone is scrambling, desperately searching for a safe place to take shelter. When Hung received the warning about the storm, his entire body froze. The first thought that came to mind wasn't about himself, it was the old, fragile riverside house where Ly Hoai Ca and little Tony lived. That house had no solid foundation, and it sat precariously close to the water's edge. If the river rose just a bit more, everything could be swept away. Hung immediately tried calling Hoai Ca, but there was no signal. He called again and again, trying every way he could to reach her. A deep, unshakable fear began to rise in his chest. Then he remembered, Hoai Ca once told him that she couldn't read much, and she wasn't good with phones either. It was very possible that, in the middle of all these urgent broadcasts, she hadn't heard a thing. And if she didn't know? If she hadn't left in time? The fear consumed him. Hung could no longer sit still. Despite the torrential rain and howling wind, he grabbed his raincoat, took a flashlight, and sped off into the storm, racing toward Hoai Ca's house, while the tempest grew more violent by the second. On the other side of the storm, inside that fragile little home, Hoai Ca was clutching Tony tightly in her trembling arms. Outside, the wind howled and slammed against the thin walls as if trying to rip the roof off the ground. The power pole had fallen, the entire area was plunged into darkness. The phone signal had vanished. She had tried to call for help, tried to send a message, but nothing worked. She and her son were trapped. Isolated. The waves from the river crashed harder and louder. The water was rising fast, now less than half a meter from the floor. She stood there, frozen, unsure what to do. The only road out of the village was blocked by fallen trees. The water was knee-deep, the mud dangerously slick. With a small child in tow, she didn't dare risk stepping into that fierce storm. One wrong step, one gust of wind stronger than the last, and they could both be swept away forever. She wanted to go to a neighbor's house, to find someone, anyone, to help. But all the nearby homes were shut tight. People might have already fled, or were just as paralyzed with fear as she was. Not a single light. Not a single voice. Outside, only the roar of the wind and the violent hammering of rain on the metal roof. Hoai Ca hugged Tony even tighter, her lips turning pale as she whispered trembling prayers. She no longer knew what to cling to, except a miracle. Someone. Anyone. Someone who wouldn't leave her and her son behind in this disaster. The rain kept falling. The wind kept screaming. And Hoai Ca sat there, holding her child in the cold darkness, eyes fixed on the door. Waiting. Hoping. Amid the howling fury of the storm, Hung rode alone through the blinding white curtain of rain. The wind slapped against his face, and every raindrop felt like a needle piercing his skin. The road to Hoai Ca's house was now almost unrecognizable, sections had vanished beneath floodwater, and uprooted trees lay sprawled across the path. Hung drove as far as he could, but when the water reached his knees and the current grew dangerously strong, he had no choice but to stop. He left the motorbike at a roadside house, the doors shut, no sign of anyone inside. With no other option, Hung rolled up his pants, adjusted his raincoat, bent low against the wind, and stepped straight into the heart of the storm. The path ahead was a chaotic mire, slick mud, churning water, and violent gusts that nearly knocked him over. At one point, a large branch, snapped loose by the wind, crashed down and struck his shoulder, sending him sprawling in pain and dizziness. But he didn't stop. He could only think of Hoai Ca, the fragile woman. Where was she now? And Tony, the little boy who called him Uncle Hung, was he safe? After nearly 3 exhausting hours wading through the storm, crossing broken roads, climbing over fallen trees and trudging through floodwaters, Hung finally reached the riverside neighborhood where Hoai Ca lived. The sight before him left him stunned. The main post holding up Hoai Ca's house had tilted precariously. The chicken coops and makeshift sheds around it had been torn apart. Garden trellises lay scattered in muddy ruin. The river had already overflowed into the yard. Wind screamed through the air, shaking the fragile house as if it might collapse at any moment. A surge of dread flooded Hung's heart. He rushed to the door, pounding on it with all his strength, shouting, "Hoai Ca! It's me! Open the door! Hoai Ca!" A few seconds passed, each one unbearable. Then, the door flung open. Hoai Ca stood there, face pale, hair disheveled, clutching Tony tightly in a thin blanket. Her eyes widened in disbelief. The man she thought would never make it, was now standing right before her. Soaked from head to toe, mud streaked across his clothes, blood dripping from a wound on his left shoulder, yet in his eyes burned a fierce, unshakable resolve. She stumbled forward and barely whispered, "Hung." Before Hung collapsed to his knees, utterly spent. Hoai Ca let out a broken sob as she caught him in her trembling arms. Tears fell freely, without restraint. In that moment, she understood, no one else in the world would walk through a storm to save her. No one but him. Hung clutched her hand tightly and whispered, "I'm here now. It's going to be okay." He took off his raincoat and gently draped it over her shoulders. Then, he cradled Tony against his chest, warming the shivering child with his own breath and body heat. Holding on to Hoai Ca's hand, he looked her in the eyes and spoke firmly. "Listen to me. We can't stay here. The water's rising fast. This river is going to wash everything away. You have to trust me, we have to leave now. I'll take both of you to my house. It's safer there. But we don't have time. Hold on to my hand. Don't let go. Okay?" Hoai Ca nodded, tears still streaking her face. Her hand clutched his like it was the last lifeline. And so, under the ghostly wail of the wind, 3 small figures left the collapsing home behind. One man with bruised shoulders carrying a child in his arms, the other hand pulling the woman he loved. They walked into the storm without looking back. Because they knew. 1 second too late, and there'd be nothing left to return to. The river kept rising, fierce and unforgiving. Rain poured down in relentless sheets, and the wind howled so violently it bent the very air. Hung held tightly to Hoai Ca's hand, cradling Tony against his chest with the other. The water now reached above their knees, and each step became a battle with nature itself. The soft ground beneath them kept giving way, threatening to pull all three under with every move. But Hung didn't hesitate. He didn't stop. He knew he had to get them out of the danger zone, no matter the cost. They left the collapsing neighborhood behind, heading toward the road ahead, the path Hung hoped would lead to safety. But there, the river had already overrun the land, transforming the road into a roaring stream. It was no longer just a muddy mess, it was a torrent. Wild. Murky. Unpredictable. Hung told Hoai Ca to hold tightly to his hand. Step by step, they pressed forward. Then, a thunderous explosion rang out, as if the earth itself had cracked open. Maybe a levee had burst, or the pressure had forced a drainage system to rupture. Whatever it was, seconds later, a massive surge of floodwater slammed into them, rising to their waists in an instant. It all happened in a flash. The violent current struck with brutal force. Hoai Ca lost her balance, her hand slipped from Hung's grasp. He lunged to catch her, but it was too late. Her small figure was swept away, spinning helplessly in the current, her scream swallowed by the storm. Hoai Ca. Hung's scream pierced through the chaos. He wanted to chase after her immediately, but Tony was still in his arms, clinging to his neck in terror, crying uncontrollably. Hung held the child tighter, his heart ripping in two. He knew he couldn't leave Tony behind. The boy was far too young, far too fragile to survive alone in this hellish storm. Summoning his remaining strength, Hung ran as fast as he could to a nearby house that still had a light on. He pounded on the door and, when a resident opened it, he handed Tony over with barely enough time to say, "Please keep him safe. I have to save someone." Without waiting another second, Hung turned and sprinted back toward the place where Hoai Ca had disappeared. The water was still thick and churning, he couldn't tell where the road ended and the river began. But he didn't care. He ran along the riverbank, shouting over and over. "Hoai Ca. Where are you?" The wind shredded his voice, but he kept calling. Every patch of debris, every shadow in the water twisted his heart with a cruel dance of hope and heartbreak. He waited. He searched. He called. His eyes stung, not just from the rain, but from fear. From desperation. And then, nearly a kilometer from where she'd vanished, he froze. There, floating amidst the churning waters, a massive log drifted downstream. Clinging to it, was Hoai Ca. Her hands gripped the wood for dear life. Her body was soaked, hair plastered to her face, trembling uncontrollably. But her eyes were wide open. She was still conscious. And when she saw him, a flicker of hope lit up that rain-drenched gaze. Hung saw her, too. A surge of emotion exploded in his chest. He screamed. "Hoai Ca. Hold on. Don't let go." He ran along the riverbank, tracking the current, estimating where the log might drift closest to shore. He spotted a curve ahead, just enough of a bend. That was his chance. Frantically, he looked for a rope, anything. A broken fence wire. A stray line from a chicken coop. Didn't matter what it was, as long as it could save her. He dashed forward, racing to intercept the log's path. The rain made the ground slick, but he dug in his heels, bracing himself. And then, at the exact moment the log neared, he twisted, and with all his strength, flung the rope. It flew. Right as Hoai Ca looked up. She caught it. "Hold on tight. Don't let go." Hung roared. He began to pull. Every muscle in his arms burned. The rope strained. the water fought back. The log was heavy. But inch by inch, she moved. Closer. Closer. Until finally, her feet touched solid ground. Hung rushed forward, yanked her the rest of the way onto the bank. She collapsed into his arms, trembling. Speechless. Unbelieving. She was still alive. She couldn't believe it. Those eyes. That embrace. He had waited for her, until the very last moment. Hung held her tightly. Said nothing. They could feel each other's heartbeats. The breath still in their lungs. She wept, shaking, her head against his shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. I thought I'd never see you or our son again. Hung clutched her as if letting go might lose her forever. His voice choked. You're safe now. I'm here. I won't let you go. Not ever again. The storm raged on. The river still roared behind them. But there, on the muddy bank that had nearly claimed her life, two souls had found each other again. Not by chance. But because true love never backs down from the storm. After pulling Hoai Ca from the floodwaters, Hung didn't let her take another step on her own. He gently helped her up, draped his raincoat over her trembling shoulders, and wrapped an arm around her back, supporting each weary step. His eyes never left her, not for a single second. The gaze of a man who had just reclaimed something precious, something he thought he had lost forever. The short walk that remained was still misted with light rain, but the floodwaters had begun to recede. Around them, neighbors were emerging, quietly starting to clean up the wreckage the storm had left behind. As they passed a nearby house with lights still on, the front door flew open. The neighbor who had earlier taken Tony came rushing out, the child in her arms. As soon as Tony saw his mother, he burst into tears, heart-wrenching sobs, and ran straight to her. His tiny hands clung tightly to her clothes, as if afraid she might disappear again. Hoai Ca dropped to her knees and wrapped him in her trembling arms. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization that she was still alive. That she had survived. That she was still here, with her child, and with him. Hung said nothing. He quietly lifted Tony into his arms, gently wrapped an arm around Hoai Ca's waist, and led them home, to his home. A place of warmth. Of safety. A place no storm could ever reach. Inside the softly lit room, the three of them sat in silence. Hoai Ca was wrapped in a thick blanket, her hand still clutching Hung's, afraid that if she let go, it would all vanish like a dream. Tony curled up in her lap, sleepy and drained, yet still nuzzling close to her chest, as if trying to hold on to the home he had nearly lost. Outside, the wind had stilled. The rain had stopped. And the only sounds that remained were their soft, steady breaths. The quiet rhythm of three hearts slowly returning to peace. After standing at the edge of life and death. No one spoke. But in their eyes, in that sacred silence, there was a quiet happiness. A deep, wordless gratitude. They had survived. They had found their way back to each other. And from that moment on, they knew. They would never face this uncertain world alone again. Because having each other was already enough. The next morning, the raging storm had finally passed. The sun peeked quietly through thick layers of gray clouds. But the aftermath was still heavy in the air, a silent reminder of the nightmare that had unfolded overnight. Trees lay broken and scattered. Mud and debris blanketed the roads. The water had receded, leaving long, muddy streaks and remnants of devastation in its wake. Hoai Ca's home, the only shelter she and her child had ever known, was now in ruins. The roof had been torn off. The wooden walls had collapsed. Everything inside was soaked, damaged beyond repair. Only a few items remained, a small cradle for Tony, a couple of old shirts, lying quietly amid the wreckage, like silent witnesses to everything she had fought to protect. But that morning, helping hands began to reach out. Neighbors. Old friends. Even local officials. Some came with shovels, others with tools, old tin sheets, or sandbags. No one said much, but their eyes were filled with understanding. They didn't come just to clean up. They came to show Hoai Ca she was no longer alone. And the one who had stayed by her side since yesterday was still there. Hung. He had taken leave from work without hesitation, choosing to remain with her. From the early hours, he rolled up his sleeves, working side by side with others, clearing broken beams, lifting rotted posts, patching the roof, sealing holes in the walls. His clothes were caked in mud, his wounds still unhealed, but he didn't stop for a moment. He worked as if it were his own home. Because to him, any place with her and Tony was home. In those days, Hoai Ca said little. She watched him. Sometimes she looked like she wanted to say something, but the words never came. She didn't cry. She didn't complain. She simply kept going, silently, with eyes full of quiet strength and gratitude. Those who once saw her as a lonely woman now saw something else, a man, standing beside her, shouldering the weight of life with her. By the afternoon of the third day, a car quietly pulled up at the edge of the village. From it stepped a man in his 30s and an older woman, the brother and sister-in-law of the man who had once pushed Hoai Ca into the darkest chapter of her life. They didn't come with arrogance. Nor with pity. They came with sincerity, and a late but genuine sense of remorse. They had heard of what happened to her home, and they came not just to visit, but with an envelope of financial support, and a clear offer. "Please come back with us," the sister-in-law said gently. "It's safer there. Our family wants to take responsibility now. It may be late, but we can't let you and the child live alone in such a dangerous place." Hoai Ca was silent for a long while. She didn't reject them outright. But neither did she accept. She offered a quiet thanks, and replied, "I need time to think." As they left, she turned away, quickly, so no one would see the tear that slipped from the corner of her eye. Not from sentiment, but because inside her, a different kind of storm had begun. Should she return to that family, where there was responsibility, a proper name, and a house with walls and a roof for her child? Or should she stay, right here, in this broken place, where the man who ran into the storm for her was still patching her walls, still holding her hand? That question, only she could answer. But one thing was certain. No matter what the future held, no matter where life led her, Hoai Ca, the single mother who had walked through the darkest of days, now had the strength to rise, and choose her own path. The next morning, as sunlight gently filtered through rain-soaked leaves, Hoai Ca stepped out into the garden alone. Though her body still ached from the storm, she couldn't sit still. She needed to know how much of their vegetable garden, their only means of survival, could be salvaged. She bent down to turn over the wet soil, gathered the remaining plants, pulled out the rotting roots. Her hands and feet were caked with mud, but her gaze remained steady. No complaints. No bitterness. Only quiet, persistent labor, like she had done all these years. Meanwhile, in the small temporary shelter where Hoai Ca was staying, Hung was busy repairing the broken window frame. He had stayed, never left her side. Like a nameless husband. Like the only family she could truly lean on. His hands were scraped and calloused, his left shoulder still bandaged, but he never once uttered a word of pain. Because to him, her peace was all that mattered. Just then, a car pulled up outside the yard. From it stepped Du, his eyes sharp, but turmoil stirred beneath his calm surface. He had come with a clear purpose. Noticing the door wasn't locked, Du pushed it open and stepped in. He froze when he saw Hung standing in the courtyard, hammer in hand, shirt still dusty. They locked eyes. No greetings. No introductions. There was no need. Each man knew exactly who the other was. A heavy silence lingered, until Du broke it. "You're still here? I thought you would have backed off by now." Hung didn't answer right away. He set the hammer down, wiped his hands, and replied calmly. "I'm here because Hoai Ca needs help. That's all." Du let out a dry chuckle, stepping closer, his gaze piercing. Help? If you had truly helped, she wouldn't have nearly died in that storm. If you truly loved her, your mother wouldn't have humiliated her, and she wouldn't have been forced to live in fear and poverty all these years. His voice dropped, strained with restrained anger. I was the one who did her wrong. I admit it. But I'm here to make it right. I'm Tunli's father. I have a right, and more importantly, a responsibility. I came to take her home. With me, she won't have to worry about food or shelter anymore. She won't have to cling to a man whose family never even accepted her. At those words, something flickered in Hung's eyes. But only for a moment. He looked up, voice steady. You have your reasons. And I won't deny I hurt her, too. I failed to protect her. I let my mother break her heart. That was my weakness. But don't forget, it was you who first threw her into darkness. I don't deny it, Du shot back, sharper now. But I'm trying to fix it. What about you? You can walk her through one storm, but can you walk with her through a lifetime? Have you ever dared to give up everything for her? Your family? Your comfort? Hung's fists clenched. The veins on his arms pulsed, but his voice never rose. I don't make speeches. I act. If you came here to compete, then hear me clearly. The decision isn't yours. It isn't mine either. It's hers. Another long pause. Du's eyes darkened. He realized Hung wouldn't back down. Still, he pressed forward. If you truly love her, let her go. Let her have a better life. I can give her a name. I can give Tony a proper family. You're just an outsider. Hung stepped closer, now only a breath between them. He looked Du dead in the eye. There are things money and status can never buy. You broke her. I may be late, but I'm here. If she chooses you, I'll wish you well. But don't ask me to let go, when you never once held her with your heart. Just then, the rusty gate creaked open. Hoai Ca returned. Both men fell silent. They turned to look at her, this woman standing there, her feet muddy from the garden, arms cradling a bundle of freshly picked greens, soaked by the morning dew. Her hair was tousled, her face pale, but her eyes were clear. Fully aware. She had heard. And now, the choice was hers to make. Every word Du spoke tore something open inside Hung, caught between two extremes, anger and pain. Each sentence pierced like a needle, twisting into old wounds he had buried for far too long. He didn't argue. He couldn't. Because Du had said one thing that was true. Hung had never given Hoai Ca a wedding. He had never taken her home to meet his parents, proudly and openly. He had never offered her a place they could all call a family. All he had given her were quiet gestures. Fixing the roof after a storm. Cooking dinner when she was tired. Holding Tony when the boy was scared. But were those things truly enough to be called love? Enough to protect her? Hung stood silently in the yard, eyes fixed on the gate where Hoai Ca had walked in. She hadn't spoken a word. Hadn't questioned anything. Hadn't shown favor to either side. But it was that silence that shook him the most. He realized she was waiting. Waiting for something. For an answer. For a decision. For a man who wouldn't stop at regret or sympathy. That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, Hung sat alone on the porch. The light in Hoai Ca's room was still on, casting a soft glow through the window and onto the cold floor. His heart felt unbearably heavy. He remembered his mother's eyes, the day he hesitantly mentioned marrying Hoai Ca. You're going to marry who? That girl who had a child out of wedlock? What will our family say? What will the neighbors think? Do you know how people will look at me? Those words had etched themselves into his skin. Hung didn't resent his mother. But it still hurt. He had once hoped he could balance both. Love Hoai Ca, and still keep his mother's approval. But now he knew, some roads can't be walked in the middle. You have to choose. You have to let something go. The night breeze carried the earthy scent of post-storm soil. Hung closed his eyes, listening to the beat of his own heart. And then, the same old question echoed in his mind. Do you really love her? If you do, then why are you still hesitating? If you do, why have you let her face it all alone, even when you're standing right beside her? That night, Hung didn't sleep. He sat down and wrote a letter requesting extended leave from work. He left it on the table. Because he knew. She needed more than daily gestures. She needed a decision. A vow. Something final and true. Before dawn broke, Hung quietly left the house. He told no one. Only a small note remained on Hoai Ca's bedside table, beside a still warm cup of tea. Wait for me. This time, I won't let you carry the weight of the choice alone. What will Hung do next? Will he find the courage to stand up to his family? To fight for the woman he loves? Or will he step back and let Hoai Ca choose the safer path beside the biological father of her child? Find out in the next episode.
Hello, xin chào tất cả mọi người. Cảm ơn mọi người vì đã theo dõi video của mình. Mấy hôm nay do một chút vấn đề nên là mình không có lên video đều được. Thì hôm nay mình lên tập tiếp theo của nội dung câu chuyện của mẹ đơn thân Ly Hoai Ca và cảnh sát Hùng cho mọi người cùng xem. Mình hy vọng rằng mọi người sẽ ủng hộ kênh mình nhiều hơn trong những video tới. Và mong rằng video này thì mọi người có thể theo dõi nhiều hơn, cũng như là để lại những ý kiến đóng góp ở phần bình luận để góp ý cho kênh, cũng như là chúc phúc cho Hoai Ca và Hùng có thể ở bên nhau và vượt qua khó khăn hiện tại. Và nội dung của kênh LyTuDiep thì mình vẫn sẽ cố gắng lên đều hơn nữa để cho mọi người xem vào những hôm sau nha mọi người. Nếu như mọi người yêu quý kênh mình cũng như là ủng hộ cho kênh mình thì mọi người hãy đăng ký kênh, sau đó bật chuông thông báo lên để không bỏ lỡ bất kỳ video nào nha. Và hãy nhớ là like video cũng như là chia sẻ video này đến những người khác để cho mọi người cũng có thể xem video hay này nhé. Xin chào tạm biệt, hẹn gặp lại trong những video tiếp theo.